Hi, welcome back. My name's Chris from We Communicate. We specialise in teaching French to speakers of English specifically. And in this video I'll be talking about italki, the language learning platform italki, and whether it's worth it or not, and I'll be sharing my experience. So what do I know about italki? Well, between 2019 and 2022 I had close to 3,000 lessons, 3,000 classes on italki, so I'm guessing I know at least a bit about it. So I'll be sharing my experience. I'm not completely wrong, I'm not completely right, it is my experience and it can only ever be my opinion. So let's get started. Is italki worth it or not to learn a language? My short answer is we have to keep in mind that there are three partners. There's italki, there's the tutor, and there's the language learner. So if you're a language learner, maybe, can be good. If you're italki, yes, it's very good. And if you're a language tutor, no, not really. Three different interests, three different perceptions. Now, the obvious advantages of italki are the ones you can work out for yourself. They have volume, they have a big choice of languages, they have a safe payment system, they're cheap and they're easy to use. It does what it says on the tin. There's nothing here that you won't know already about how italki works. So it might be more interesting to speak about the downsides. Well, the first criticism towards italki is that I think, it's an opinion, I think, that the whole italki experience is flawed for both the teacher and the learner because of the algorithm. There's a very dynamic interference on the italki website. And the second reason why I think the experience is flawed is, well, because of italki's self-serving priorities, unfortunately. The simplistic explanation of what italki is that it's a website on which tutors can advertise their services. But it's not so easy. It's not just a neutral standstill website like a telephone directory. It's not the way it works. Obviously, italki is in the business of languages and in a very serious way. They take 15% off any transaction on their website, at least that's the way it was when I used to tutor there, in exchange for which they act as a go-between between the teacher and the learner. So the money is in escrow, so you pay money up front and then it's released when the lesson is finished. And if all goes well, you'll never hear about italki, you'll never hear from them. You'll never hear from them directly, and you won't ever really know anything about them. I think they're a willingly anonymous platform whose staff operate somewhat in the shadows. You know, there's not a face to italki. You can't say if there's 3 people working in the offices or 200. You just don't know much about them at all. And they only step in when there's a dispute, and the rest of the time they just run a website which provides them with, let's be honest, an upstream of money. It's an upstream trickle of money. From italki's perspective, obviously they want the most business to take place on their platform, which means the most tutors and the most learners. They want to sail a steady ship, and they'll only ever make themselves heard if a teacher misses a class. Now, the other factors such as the quality of the teaching and the satisfaction of the tutor, I don't believe are italki's priorities. I don't think it's very much on their radar. And I think that this fact can have quite a bearing on your success as a tutor, if you intend to tutor on italki, and carry a few disappointments, especially if you lose sight of the fact that italki watches out for the interests of italki. Practically what I noticed there is that there'll always be a newer tutor who's more visible than an older tutor. I don't know why they do this. I think to keep tutors signing up and maybe to get a sense of novelty going, you know, it's a refreshing of the image. Your exposure as an older tutor will be moderated by this algorithm. You have to keep that in mind. I've had learners tell me how happy they were to have found me, as if they'd made the right choice between so many tutors. But I had to tell them in all frankness that, in a sense, their choice was predetermined by this hidden hand, which assigned my profile to their search query. So in other words, 2 different language users will see different results between the tutors that are available. So this concept might seem well thought out, nothing wrong with it, but a noticeable consequence of the hidden hand of italki is the fact that a tutor will only have a limited amount of interest coming in. And you quickly start to feel, if you're a tutor on italki, that there's sort of an unnatural flow of inquiries. You'll start to think, well, why do I only ever get 2 or 3 inquiries a month? Why not 7? Why does it feel so controlled? And then later you find out that there's a probable reason for that. Now, as a new tutor, the upside is that you will be put to work quite quickly. Independent really, whether you're good at your job, if you have experience or not, I think you will be put to work quite quickly because they do want new tutors signing up. And you might feel as if it was a platform that was wonderful, and you might start to project yourself in terms of the real world, in real world business, and you might tell yourself that if you keep doing this enough times, you'll build up popularity and expertise. And it makes sense, doesn't it? The better you get at your trade, the more customers you have, the more popularity you develop. But it doesn't quite work that way on italki. Indeed, nothing could be further from the truth. I believe that italki long thought of this problem for themselves and made it so that such situations don't happen. I don't think it's in their business interest to run the risk of their reputation as a business in such a way and rely on the presence of a few good tutors that could leave at any time. I think italki's interest is to spread out the talent so that the product remains italki, not the teacher. So the product is italki, it's not the teacher. And if you think of it, I think it makes a lot of sense. So you're putting forward your product, it's italki, it's the brand. Imagine if the reputation of italki is based on the talent of a few excellent teachers, well then it's very risky for them because you lose stability. They could leave at any time. And so your brand, it plummets. It's not as good as it used to be just because these people left. So I think it's more in their interest to spread out the talent. From what I've seen on the platform italki, I don't think that experience in tutoring or expertise in the field of languages plays a meaningful part. It's not what I've seen. A tutor also doesn't develop their own little business within an online marketplace and strive for excellence and reputation. italki is not a marketplace. They are the product. So you're not going to develop your own little business within a marketplace. italki remains the product, and they're very clever at maintaining that. So in a sense, we could say that they run sort of a socialist-inspired system in which customers are distributed evenly between traders. And if you're an unlucky customer, I believe so, I think it's possible that you will be assigned a poor tutor, or at least given the choice between tutors that might not be ideal for you. And I think I can back this up with proof. For the longest time on italki, I advertised myself as a French and English tutor, and I had this whole bilingual thing. You know, I described my services clearly, and so I wanted to teach English to French speakers, and I wanted to do the opposite also, French to English speakers, as I do here on We Communicate. But regardless of this, my students were all Russian, Brazilian or Chinese. But where were all the speakers of English? Where were all the Brits, the Belgians, the Americans, the French? Did they just happen not to see my profile? And I used to think, oh, interesting, another Brazilian student. But I don't speak Portuguese. Where are all the others? Why is it only them who ever see my profile? Where were all the speakers of English? Now, the few times I was lucky, if you can call it luck, to meet an Irish, Brit or an American student, of course, well, they were delighted because they thought, oh, this is brilliant. You speak English like us and you teach French. You know, you have this whole bilingual tutoring thing going. And they stayed with me for months and sometimes even years. And they said, you know, it's so great. You speak 2 languages. Brilliant. You know, and I said, well, exactly. You're the kind of people I want to reach. But where are you and why can't you see me? Why aren't I visible on italki? But I strongly believe that they were hidden from me and they couldn't see my profile. And for this, you have to blame the algorithm. I remember when I set out on italki, it was with the innocence of the positive thinking tutor who thought he could build up a reputation based on quality and numbers. And I decided to aim for 1,000 lessons on italki, thinking that it would show my commitment to teaching and transform into more business. And it turned out that 1,000 made not the slightest difference. Neither did 2,000. And I was actually working much less than when I originally joined with 3 classes experience. I was working much more during the first year, despite all the improvements in my experience, in my technique, and all the learning material that I offered. And I don't think it makes a lot of business sense. If you compare this to the real world, it makes no sense that you'd be a professional with thousands of hours of experience. You have all the reviews to back it up, because on italki people can see all the reviews you have. The service goes up, but you actually work less than when you were inexperienced. And it's not that I was losing customers, it's just that I wasn't getting any inquiries anymore. I think it had to do with italki's algorithm that was either out of whack or designed to do specifically that. They wanted to show the newer tutors as a priority, and I had fallen out of fashion, or I wasn't as fresh as I was. And these suspicions were confirmed when I visited the tutors forum, because there's a forum where tutors go, and I was seeing the exact same grievances from other senior tutors who said that they too weren't getting inquiries anymore, and I found this very strange, that we all had exactly the same complaint. Now, you do have the opportunity to write to italki and tell them. You can send them an email, but when you do contact the ever-elusive italki and ask them why you have no customers, they always send the same nonsensical message they send to all the tutors. Quote unquote, you have to change the description of your profile, they say. You have to participate in the forum and change your availabilities to suit the times that are most in demand. And that's what italki tells tutors to do, which is really a handy way to get rid of the question and place in the lap of a tutor a problem they couldn't possibly solve. Because really it's quite amusing in a sense, if you transfer this to the real world, to have to revive your profile. And I think it says something about the priorities of italki. I was focusing on quality and they were all about the image, you know, always new, always fresher. To them, new is always better. That's how I perceived it. New is always better. But when you think of this advice in terms of the real world, it makes no sense. Like, you'd have a shop that you'd have to refresh every few weeks or days and change the opening hours to hope to find new customers. It just makes no sense. What you want is to improve your product. It's not to change the image or the logo or the colour of the shop. It's all about quality. Well, it should be, at least. If you're a bakery, your product is bread. You want your bread to be good. It's not about changing the opening hours. This would be the reasoning of a madman, surely. As for the forum, I think that once more it benefits no one but italki, because they get their forum kept alive by tutors who work for free, by answering the questions, but the learners who use the forum are usually people who have no intention to ever take a lesson. And I know this because not once in my 3,000 lessons did any student reference any question on any forum. They didn't even know it existed. So the forum is really used by people who don't buy the language classes anyway. It also makes no business logic, because if you sign up to italki, you go straight from A to B. You sign up, you pay, and you want to find yourself a language tutor. You don't first go on the forum to see which is the tutor who seems the most knowledgeable. No student would ever make potentially nonsensical comparisons between unrelated answers to unrelated questions between unrelated language tutors. No one's going to go to the forum and say, oh, John answered this question in this way, but Sally answered a completely different question in this way. Oh, I wonder who's better between John and Sally. You know what, I think I'll go with Sally. Now, still on the matter of the forum, another problem with these forums is the presence of the community tutors. What's a community tutor? Well, these are unqualified people who volunteer their services as tutors and who are mostly doing classes for free. On these forums, I've seen retired people, for example, and they answer questions on the forum faster than you can even read the question. So the professional tutor is caught in a race with these community tutors, and they're wasting time out of a working day to answer questions on a forum rather than earning a living. But this forum, even if it was a tool for getting noticed, the way it's designed makes it impossible, because the forum, at least in my time, it operated as a sort of a news feed, and it constantly pushed down the older questions. So a teacher's answer to a question would quickly disappear from sight, and it would never be seen by a potential customer. So you're really answering questions for no one. No one would ever see your answer, and no one's going to spot your answer and say, oh, he looks like he knows what he's talking about. I think I'm going to do classes with him. Whether the quality of the learning or the teaching is any good on italki, it's quite hard to say. In my experience, at least, an overwhelming majority of users purchase conversation practice. It's really what most people are there for. And their motivation for using italki is obviously the supermarket format, in which they have an availability of thousands of tutors at very low rates. Actual teaching, as I saw it, or learning even, occurs very rarely. It's mostly chatting. What I'm about to say next I think is important if you're thinking of tutoring on italki. I think you should be aware that the average user of italki is not one who comes with an academic frame of mind wanting to learn something new. They rather want to put their language skills to use and chat with a tutor. They're not there really to learn something, they're just really there to chat. So the italki tutor quickly becomes sort of an expert chatter who's able to fill the space of an hour with chit-chat covering any topic under the sun. So there's no little teaching going on. You really do become an expert chatter. People say, "Oh, hello, Chris," and they sort of look at you, and you're meant to say, "Okay, well, let's talk about, I don't know, what would you feel like talking about?" And you're supposed to lead the conversation, and then they'll respond, and you become an expert chatter. In this also, I think italki provides an interesting look into the human psyche. Countless times I encountered learners that I could really help progress, but they all had in common a preference for a chit-chat session that had neither purpose nor origin. We were neither going anywhere nor coming from anywhere. I had no assurance that I would ever see the learner again after our session, no more than I could program some kind of plan in view of a progression. I just opened my emails every morning and saw, "Oh, so-and-so is back today, is he?" I never knew who was going to sign up for a session or disappear for 3 months and come back later. You just never knew. Only once or twice did it happen out of 3,000 classes that I met a learner who wished to commit to regular appointments. And even then, there's a case of one Brazilian lady, I remember her well, I've forgotten her name now, who booked with me for close to 2 years, every Sunday, and never made the slightest progress. Her name was Gisele, I think. She never made the slightest progress for 2 years. She wanted to speak English with me. She was just as much a beginner at English as she was 2 years earlier. It was quite fascinating to see. I genuinely could have done miracles for Gisele, but it seems that her intention was rather to be a user of italki. And this is a very true thing. If you use italki, you become a student of italki, you behave in an italki kind of way. You're not there to learn, you're there to behave as a user of italki, and this is why I say it gives us an interesting glimpse into the human psyche. To me, what was even more disconcerting is that most students showed up to the class expecting to be entertained by means of a conversation. So they would wait for the teacher, myself, to lead the way and animate the talk like a little radio host. I never once met a proactive learner who ever came with a list of topics or a plan for a class. No one ever said, "I'd like to learn this, that, I'd like to talk about this rather than that." None of them just showed up and, "Okay, Chris, give me a chit-chat." And if the lesson fell flat, if the class fell flat, the responsibility fell entirely onto the tutor. And of course the language learner would go on to a more entertaining tutor. I think the average user of italki endorses a kind of italki identity in which they become a purchaser of the product more than the learner of languages. It's very strange in this way. You're more a user of the italki product than really a learner of languages. One noticeable side of this italki identity was a desire to always include italki as a third partner in our class. So there was myself, the student, and italki, and the students always wanted to include italki somehow. I started to believe that the atmosphere of the website, the certain italki atmosphere on the website, influences the future performance of the learner as language learners. It's quite interesting to see. This is my theory, but I think that signing up to italki as a language learner has such an impact that students become language learners in the style of italki. There's an identity shift that happens. So they never remained independent people, in a sense. You know what I mean? They became products of italki. They became italki style learners. And it was almost as if choosing italki guaranteed that students would only be half invested in actual language learning. Out of 3,000 lessons, only 1 or 2 realized that they would be getting far better service if they booked straight through the tutor. Many of these learners thought that if they excluded italki, it would somehow diminish the already very low standards of the class. And this proved to me that the student was more comfortable in the role of italki user, quote unquote, than they were in the role of language learner, quote unquote. They were buying a brand instead of learning a language. And that brand is, of course, italki. You see the difference? They weren't so much buying the service that the brand was selling, they were buying the brand. They were acting as italki language learners. I remember clearly one boy I was tutoring at the time, and I said, hey, listen, you have two options. I didn't put it in this way, but I said, well, essentially there are two options. Option A, you can just have a chat for your money, and option B, you can book with me directly and you get my full commitment, or you get hours of free learning material. You get much more for your money. And which one do you want? And contrary to any sort of logic, it was always option A that was the preferred option. And it was a bit like a budgerigar in a cage, with a cage door wide open. Will the budgerigar fly out? But there was just too much freedom, too many choices. And these learners wanted to remain users of the brand italki and ultimately not learn anything. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about, if you're thinking of tutoring through italki, is their way of handling disputes. If you're a professional tutor who won't accept late cancellations or last-minute cancellations, I think you'll have a very hard time setting certain standards. Since out of the three partners, you are the weakest. You're the partner who matters the least. Because, one, italki has thousands of customers. Two, the customers have thousands of tutors, which leaves you, three, with nothing really. You'll want to please what customers you have, and you're in no position of strength to ask for any sort of justice. So more often than not, a student can ask for a refund of the prepaid lesson and go search for a more accommodating teacher at the drop of a hat. This leaves you as a tutor either saying yes to all late cancellations or losing a customer. On the topic of money, the rates you set will be those of a conversation and not a class, because students will only pay so much for the service, especially if their first motivation isn't to learn but to chat. And we saw that most people are there to chat and become users of italki. 99% do. On the very same italki website where you try to sell your professional services, students can find people who do it for free, the so-called community tutors. Knowing that an italki user usually wants a long-term chatting partner, the rates will have to remain very, very low. No one's going to pay any amount of money if they're just there to chat and not really to learn. I mean, that's really what they've come to do. So the rates will be those of a chat. But it doesn't end there. When you set your rates, you have to realize that in some countries, $9 an hour is a massive amount of money, or at least a respectable amount of money. And these are some of the teachers you're in competition with. So if you want to set rates that meet the Western world cost of life, you will be at a disadvantage unless you're ready to charge $8 or $9 an hour. I never looked in detail at other teachers' profiles, but the few times I did, I was surprised at the disparity in standards. I saw lawyers dipping their toes into language teaching, retired business owners, professional TEFL or CELTA teachers. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you'll see people with really dreadful English, because you have these little presentation videos so you can actually hear them speak. They have dreadful English accents who make even basic grammar mistakes in their video presentations. There doesn't seem to be any apparent standards of quality on italki, not that I saw at least. Now, logical thinking would have us believe that there's some sort of natural weeding out process that occurs and leaves more room for the better tutors. Now, this would be so in the physical world at least if you ran a bakery, for example, but not so on the italki platform. I really do believe that a mediocre tutor will have as much chance of earning money as an expert tutor on italki. By lowering their standards and accepting so many people as professional teachers, I think italki have created stability for themselves and for the learner. But the genuine and quality teacher will have to compete with thousands of others who are just as much in the spotlight with 3 lessons under their belt as you are with 1,000. There are so many italki tutors out there on the platform that I don't think it's possible for you to make a name for yourself as a language tutor. And besides, the website wasn't designed for that to ever happen. Day to day, there'll be an unpredictable flow of lessons, ranging from many to nothing. Some of my Sundays were chock-a-block with as many as 8 lessons on a typical Sunday, But then it stopped being. It just stopped happening. No student was ever interested in Sundays ever again. I hadn't changed anything. All of a sudden, oh, no more Sundays. For a year, I had no more Sunday bookings, whereas the year before, they had been so popular. In all aspects of their platform, italki creates a sort of sub-reality in which the governing principles find no equivalent in the physical world. When I was there last, and this was 2022, I found that the payment options were very problematic also, because they only paid in dollars and only to PayPal or Payoneer. When I had made a sufficient amount of money, I would transfer it to Payoneer, and I can't remember if italki charges for this. So they already take 15% commission, but do they charge for the transfer? I can't remember. Then to my bank in England in pounds sterling, for which there was definitely a charge. Unless they've sorted this since, withdrawing your money was costly and impractical. Yet another thing I want to point out is taking a break or holiday can have dramatic consequences on italki. The one time I did this, I noticed a drop in my post-holiday bookings, which never went back up again. Never, never. My profile went to the bottom of the pile, somewhere lost in their opaque algorithm. It was the beginning of the end for me, and a few weeks later I was off the platform. So I took a holiday once and that was it. You know, the algorithm messed up. I don't know what the algorithm does, you know. You say you're not available for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you come back, you put your profile on available, it will never be the same again. But then there's also a psychological element, because for weeks on end, when you have no inquiries for anyone on italki, well, you begin to question yourself. You start to think about yourself as a tutor, and you start to think about your skills, and you wonder about your rates and about what you used to do better and what you could improve on. And but the fact is, you'll never know what happened. You think about it, you'll never know what happened. You know, there might have just been a shift in the italki algorithm and you disappeared from public view. The italki search robot does not care if your profile can't be found, and might even be designed for that so that the newer tutors get found first. There you have it. That was just about my experience on italki. I hope this experience saves any enthusiastic tutor any unnecessary disappointments and provides you with an understanding of it from the inside. I think it's good to remember that italki is an algorithm-regulated platform, and that making a name for yourself won't be possible because it's not in their interest. You won't sign up on italki and start to make a name for yourself. It's not designed for that. I think it's very important to know this. I don't think that going full-time on italki will be possible either, not even part-time for that matter. A trickle of lessons will come your way until one day you realise that no one new has contacted you in a few weeks. What happened? You just got spat out of the algorithm. If your interest as a tutor is just to make a few pennies on the side, a bit of supplementary income, I would say why not? If you're more serious about your tutoring, I would say avoid at all costs. Now for students and users of italki, if you're interested in learning a language, I generally couldn't say whether it's recommendable to use them. At best you might find a pleasing conversation partner. At worst you'll find an opportunist wanting to make a few bucks on the side by tutoring. I think it's good to remember that italki prioritizes what's good for italki, which likely has very little to do with offering quality language teaching. I don't think it's the business they're in. I think it's a money trickle upwards sort of pyramid of a website that wishes for the largest number of tutors to sign up so that they can take their commission. I think it's their business model. They want a huge base at the bottom, you know, a big number of tutors, big number of learners, and then the money goes up. It's like a pyramid sort of thing, and that's the business model. I don't believe that they're genuinely interested in language teaching. If you do sign up to italki to learn a language, you have to remember that it's like Google. It's a dynamic search engine, and it influences your results. italki is not just an innocent alphabetic listing of tutors. Yes, you have an entirely free choice of tutors, but only within the ones they'll show you. Because of their profoundly opaque nature, you'll never know how they choose tutors, nor if they even know what a good tutor is. In a way, italki is like the little mouse on the wheel. You know, it thinks it's getting somewhere, but it's not really getting anywhere at all. And if you're a tutor, I think that's what your experience will be like. The tutor is the little mouse. You think you're building up a reputation. You think you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 lessons. It really doesn't make any difference at all. I would conclude by saying that we should keep in mind that italki is a self-serving website that always looks out for their own interest first. They don't explain, they don't justify, and they look at you from the shadows. If you're a tutor, you don't know who they are. They look at you from the shadows and they take their commission. That's my impression of italki. Thank you very much for watching. Well, this was quite a long video. I hadn't realized I had so much to say about italki. And yeah, I quit in 2022 just after my holidays. I took a break from italki for about 2 or 3 weeks, came back, it was never the same again. You just disappear from the algorithm, you're not seen anymore. And the thing is, with all these Brazilian and Chinese and who else was it? Yeah, Brazilian, Chinese and Russian, lots of Russians also on italki. And just occasionally you see an English-speaking learner who wants to learn French, and you say, well, where were you all along? Where were you? Why didn't you find me earlier? Because, well, my profile was hidden from you and you couldn't find me, and it was just the luck of the draw that you saw my profile appear. And it is a very opaque system with the money disputes. If you tutor on italki, you really have the definite impression that you are the weakest partner. I mean, italki is definitely in a position of strength. They don't really care if you're there or not. It's not designed for you to become good as a tutor. It's not designed for it. They are in a position of strength. They are the product. Then you have the customer. They're in a position of strength also because they have access to so many tutors. And then it just leaves you, the tutor. You are the weakest partner and you are the one who matters the least. The tutor's not the one who makes the quality of italki. italki is the product and it's the supermarket model. So the value of italki is volume, it's not quality. And when I say that, I've never met anyone who was genuinely interested in learning languages. It's true. They just show up for a chit-chat. It's the strangest thing. And you look at your bookings in the morning, you say, oh, I'm seeing so-and-so today, but you don't know what it means or how long they're going to stay with you, and they just disappear, and they turn up, and they disappear again, and there's no sort of learning structure, and you're not going anywhere, really. They stay at the same level, just like the Brazilian lady I saw for 2 years every Sunday, Gisele. That's my experience with italki. I think, you'll get a cheap chat out of it. If you're a language learner, why not? If you're italki, great business. If you're a tutor, avoid it. If you're a language learner, why not? Thanks for watching. I'm Chris.